Just a quick intro, just in case you boys don't know me. Basically, I'm a no-code AI enthusiast. I've got a couple different things going. I run a YouTube channel. I'm pretty big on the Bubble forum, but I also run an agency that builds software products using a low-code tool called Bubble. When did I start that? I was actually talking about this on the way down here. It's only been just over 3 years. I remember the night. It was the 30th of June, 2021. So it's been just over 3 years from the very start, where I came from a construction background, absolutely zero tech skills at all. So it's been just over 3 years from there to now, where we've built over 60 products. As an agency in combination, we've built over 250. So that's a lot of projects for clients all over the world. So in just over 3 years, managed to do that. And now we're at a point where we're really trying to scale this agency and build products and go from there.
Cool. And to dial it back, I mean, you didn't really mention Upwork freelancing at all, right? So when we talk about getting it started.
Yeah, exactly. So basically the way this entire thing started, even before Upwork, the very first thing was, I remember the night in your old office on the 30th of June, it all started with a Google search. I had an idea. I'd been laid off from COVID. So I worked in construction, got laid off there. I was sitting on my fingers, twiddling, what can I do? And so for me, it was a Google search on how can I build an app. I'd always wanted to start a business and do something like that. And really the start was building my own app in an office. So I set up my first API integration. It was with Yahoo Stocks API or something like that. And up until that point, I didn't even know what an API was. So that was the starting point. Tried to start my own business, failed like they all do. And then I turned to Upwork. And my first job on that was $20. Took me about 8 hours to do. But the started there and then rolled into a more successful freelancing career from 2 years from there.
$20 must be the magic number, because that's exactly what my first job was as well. Cool.
It was fixing a shopping cart.
There we go. Mine was $20 and it was helping some people in Charlotte, North Carolina. Cool. Okay. And when we talk about no code, Bubble, what is Bubble? What is app development? Yeah. Why am I building apps? And why am I building apps with Bubble?
Great question. So the real selling point with Bubble, and I talk about this a lot, is speed. So nowhere in tech will you hear that you can build a complete scalable MVP of your product in 4 to 8 weeks, typically for 10 to 20K. Now, obviously that depends what agency you go for on the price range, but the timeline's the real thing. So a full scalable MVP in 4 to 8 weeks, which has never been heard before in tech. So that's the real selling point.
Cool. And I don't know if Tom, you caught that, but Tom's here as the sanity checker. You drop an MVP. Do you know what an MVP is?
I have absolutely no idea.
There we go.
Yeah. So MVP stands for minimum viable product. And when you talk to a lot of these startup owners, it's really an idea. The very first thing you push to market is your minimum viable product. So these startup founders, they have an idea. They have some problem they want to solve, and then they come to a tech company like ours and goes, this is our idea. How can you transform this idea into an application? So that initial application that we launched to market is called an MVP. Yeah. And just to follow up on that as well, on what an MVP should be, depending on the agency you talk to, we really try and slim that MVP down to a core product. And I know that sounds obvious, but you'd be surprised, especially less experienced people, and I did this a lot when in my earlier career, is you talk to clients and they want to solve these massive problems and they want to create these super complex applications, 5 to 10 third-party service integrations, all these, 50 pages in an application, all of this complexity. And you realize that when you build for these clients and you try and do all that for them, you end up in no man's land because you're building these super complex things that have never even been in the market before. So half of the challenge of an agency owner for us is to get your idea, come back to you and just reality and sanity check you and be like, look, this is a great product, but all of these things, I think we can push this to stage 2, stage 3, stage 4, not because we don't want to build it for you, but we need to build the absolute core product, push that to market first, then we can worry about all of these extras, because otherwise we're just going to be bogged down trying to get all this to work for you, get all these missing pieces to connect together, and it just takes forever and it's super expensive for you.
And that's a great question. One of my clients started building software conventionally in December last year. We're now rolling into September and they're still going.
Yeah.
And what I think you maybe haven't touched on is the byproduct of taking that long, right? The whole aim of building an app is you're trying to replace, generally speaking, a monthly subscription for the tech stack you're running now with a longer term solution that is going to save you a considerable amount of money up front. If we're going to use that example, those folks are, and I think what it boils down to is emotional investment, which you haven't really touched on there, which is a lot of people start building an app and they just keep spiraling it and they never turn it on.
Yep.
The cost spiral, the functionality spirals, and in the tech world, we call it scope creep, right? So that's something you haven't touched on. I've got a couple examples of folks who are still building technology who have had costs balloon, right? When really what you're talking about is let's just tackle your most critical problems, roll that into an app, remove one subscription. Okay, now let's expand this use case. What else are you paying for? Let's adopt that. Right, it's a good question. Tom, you're obviously looking at adopting tech. We're in Magaluf last week. We're talking about that, right? And I think a big thing
adopting tech in Magaluf.
And I think a big thing that became apparent, right, is that like you don't know what you want. And I think something that's probably worth touching on with Adam as well is like a big advantage for, I was telling you, hey, there's tech, you could be doing things differently a long time ago. Because I think it comes down to art of the possible, and something you may want to touch on as well is that when you're running an agency and a benefit you have now that you didn't have a couple years ago, and you tell me all the time, is that clients will come to you and they'll say, hey, I want a marketplace application. I wanted this, I wanted that. And the real value and what makes people comfortable is the fact that you've done it before, right?
Exactly,
and I think it's something that Tom's looking at as well. He's like, hey, I'm like, look, I've already done this. Let me show you it working for somebody else. I feel like that was the real, cherry on top to say, well, oh, this is a safe pair of hands because he's already done this and it's already working and I can see it right in front of me. Anyway, so looping back, no code. So when I'm building technology, tell me the difference. Why am I building on Bubble or no code versus just building it outright?
Two kind of things. I want to touch on what you just talked about in a second as well. But why are you building on no code or Bubble? And that comes a little bit back to what I was talking about before, is speed. So speed and cost are obviously interchanged. If you can build something in 4 to 8 weeks, when you think about what you're actually paying for, which is a developer's time, it's cheaper. And often with no code, not only can we build it with less developers, it's likely you can have one developer manage your back end, your front end, your database, and your entire tech stack. So not only can you do it with a smaller team, you can do it in a much quicker time frame, and you get a cheaper cost. The other benefit to building with Bubble is the speed that you can iterate. So it's not just the speed to that initial MVP that matters. So you can get a product to market in 4 to 8 weeks, but you'll find that when you go to market for the first time, you're going to get all this user feedback and all these changes you need to make your product an actual market fit.
How do you deal with that? Like if a client comes back, because obviously the other thing is as well from a user perspective, right? Because I'm a client and I've used Wix and tech and whatever. There's a lot of ongoing changes that happen, right? Like it's always user comes back, goes, yo, this ain't great. Like I need this. Actually, I want this. Actually, I want this. Actually, I want this. How do you deal with that from a business perspective and agency perspective, trying to adjust with that with the client? Because obviously you want to make the client happy,
100%.
But also, you quote 10K, you don't want to be spending months and months and months doing multiple changes on it. Like, how do you deal with that?
So we've got two ways of dealing with that. So one, we obviously try and get the product as correct as possible from the start. So our process, we have a discover, design, develop. We call it the 3Ds, our process on building an app. So one thing we do is instead of just jumping straight into the development with no design file or anything like that, we completely prototype your product on Figma. So what that allows us to do is to create something that you're already happy with design-wise, user flow-wise, and stuff like that. So we try and get it as correct as possible from the build. But obviously, when you get real user feedback, things are going to change. So the second thing that you kind of talked about there is support. And as an agency, we actually have an internal software that operates very similar to Trello. And so if you're familiar with Trello, it's basically a ticketing system, like a Kanban board where clients can go in there, they can add their tickets, they can add all their changes, they can see what stage it's in when we're working on it. Is it in test? We can add questions and videos onto that ticket and kind of move all those tickets through the system. And it's great for things like support as well. So not only are there going to be feature changes, there's also going to be bugs. That's just a reality of software. Even the biggest companies on this planet have got bugs in their tech. So not only do we manage feature changes, but we also manage bugs through that approach. And that happens within 4 to 8 weeks, not 6 to 12 months down the line. So.
And I think the important thing, and it's something that you learn with freelancing and what I'm touching on here, is also about expectations, right? It's like you're looking at adopting a software, right? No software is bug free, right? You're going to step onto it.
Well, the aim is to make it bug free, but from the get go, the chances that you're going to have a software that works crystal clear 100% the very first time it goes to market are unrealistic.
But what I'm also saying,
mine is good, but not that good, right?
Yeah,
exactly.
Right?
Sorry, Aman. You just watched that as well.
No, so but what I think is important is that like stability won't last because tech always evolves.
That ties into a good thing with expectations, especially no-code expectations, is you get these people, they hear, and I don't like the word no-code, I like using the word low-code, because I think to create a proper no-code application, you still need to understand the foundations of tech and how tech works. Yeah. If you don't, you're going to get something it's basically spaghetti code, but it's spaghetti no code, really. The expectations as well with clients is they hear the word no code and they think, okay, I can drag some buttons onto a page. You know, sometimes they jump in there themselves and they hook up this little landing page in a day or something. And so they think that, the next Google takes 2 days to create in Bubble. And that's something we're constantly trying to fight against, because it's one thing to build, a little working landing page and a checkout in Bubble that works when you click preview, but it's another thing to build it scalably that works with thousands of users, that works every time when when a bug's encountered, that's displayed properly, proper error handling, proper security, all that kind of stuff. That doesn't happen in 2 days. And so it happens quickly, but it doesn't happen in 2 days. Some clients seem to think that they've never really worked with no code before. They think that they can build their app for $200 in 2 days. And so, we're constantly trying to fight those expectations. Yeah. And
I'm going to ask one more question. I'm going to loop back to freelancing, but when I look at MVP, I look at building with Bubble, right? Tom came to me, he's like, hey, I want an app. I love what you've done. I want to step onto it. A big thing is time frame, right? Tom's like, term 2 starts in 3 weeks, right? Yeah. So it's not just about building tech. And the biggest thing I've learned with freelancing is like a quality product is great, but I actually think speed trumps all, right? Not just because you want to build something quickly, but also because there's a hidden cost in not having it done quickly, right?
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Not just because you're already paying for subscription costs and doing it, but it's just like, well, the longer it takes to build whatever it is I'm looking to achieve, right? In Tom's particular instance, it's like, okay, this technology allows you to scale, right? This is where we're at right now. You've got that are running it. So it's also like the longer it takes to implement, the longer it takes for you to step onto a new system and scale.
And he's probably paying subscriptions elsewhere as well.
Correct. Correct. There's obviously, with the automation and everything that comes with adopting a new software as well, you might be able to save on labor cost with team members that you're potentially hiring to do things that they shouldn't need to be doing, and so on and so forth. Right. So my final question was, a lot of the tech you're building is for people that are raising money or starting things up, right? Yep. And the biggest thing they're trying to achieve is have a system that's demoable so that they can raise funds, verify, validate what's called a proof of concept, which you probably want to elaborate on, because I'm sure Tom's probably not too sure what that is, right? Yep. So why is Bubble perfect for that?
What I want to talk about, and something that we probably don't hear about too often, but some of the startup accelerators that I've worked in, and this is a very common story, it's a lot more common than it should be, is A, how long some of these startups take to get their tech product to market, and B, how much they spend. So I actually heard recently, a startup that spent $200,000 and over 2 years and was still waiting to get their tech product to market. Now, to me, that just sounds absolutely mind-blowing, especially from a startup's point of view.
It's everywhere.
Because that's the thing. I'm hearing more and more of these stories, and I'm sitting here and I'm going, if you guys knew about the power of no code, in 4 to 8 weeks and for 1/20th of that price, you could have had something in the market, validated it, tested it. And a lot of the main thing, because I've actually been in some of these startup accelerators and kind of been sitting there quietly and listening to people talk about no code and kind of these founders give each other advice on what's possible with Bubble, and some of them are sitting there going, it's just not scalable. We can't, you can't use it for this and that. And what happens, I don't know what to call this. I'd call it like startup owner syndrome or something, is when you get emotionally invested with your startup, you build it as if it was the next Google with 200 million users, and these are the problems the startups have. They haven't generated a single.
Too much
in the politest possible way, it's got to be let's start with one.
Exactly. Let's start with one. Exactly. And this is what happens when you get really emotionally. And I have this on the very first call, and it's a great mindset to have. Don't get me wrong. Think big. But some of these startups they're going, I can't build with Bubble because when I have 200 million thousand users,
200 million thousand.
200 200 million users.
Let's just backpedal. What's 200?
We might hit some scalability issues, you know what I mean? And that's great. But what I always say is, you know, you don't have to stay on a no-code solution forever. Like we can think about the first 100,000 users on there. And if you're hitting some scalability issues with your no-code solution, you then have a product that's very, you know, tried and tested in the market. It's working. It can sit there whilst you then go to a dev team with, you know, if you've raised money or you probably have a lot of revenue if you've got that many users. Now we can talk about maybe moving this onto a traditional
I think
solution.
the best analogy for that is that you got to take the stairs and these guys are trying to take the lift. Right,
it's like when you're in Mallorca. Like, you know, there's two guys that take the stairs.
Exactly. Right? It's like you got to do one step at a time. Right, get your 100. You know, build it for 100, then upgrade it for 1,000, then upgrade it for 100,000.
Exactly. Yeah.
They're trying to take the lift to 100 million users, and it's going. You don't have that many. We're spending a fortune
you know what's
for a use
cheaper?
case that may never exist.
Exactly, and you know what's probably cheaper? These guys go, oh yeah, but you know when we have 200 million users, this is going to be a bit slow on Bubble. It probably is, but you know what? It's probably still cheaper to build your entire MVP on Bubble, scale it to 100,000 users, whatever it is. It's an arbitrary number. Then move it onto a traditional solution because the price it's going to take to iterate on all that user feedback, make all those changes, support your application is going to be a whole lot cheaper on Bubble. Then you have a complete working Bubble. You can go to a traditional dev shop and be like, this is my application. It works perfectly fine. It's validated in the market. Can you please, copy this into a traditional code
And
stack?
one of the biggest costs when you build tech conventionally, and I've built tech conventionally, I'm working with a huge company out of the US who's currently building tech conventionally, and a large portion of that development cost is actually spent on people building the wrong thing. Exactly. And if you can build it on Bubble, and it's exactly like what I showed Tom last week, it's like, if I can show you what I need built, then they're going to be super efficient at converting that into a full stack application because they're actually just doing a copy and paste job, right? Whereas when you're trying to hypothesize and be like, hey, Adam, here's what I'm trying to build, and it's got all this functionality, and we're integrating with everything under the sun, right? There's actually a lot of cost that's going to be involved in them building the wrong thing. And that's what I think they don't touch on, because when you hypothesize, it takes forever. If I can just give you the homework to copy, and much quicker.
What we're really talking about there is the difference in client vision from, the client and the developer. And that's I feel like this is one of the most talked about divisions, in that you've got business owners with big bright ideas and then you've got developers, and there's often a really frustrating communication barrier between those two parties. You hear a lot of tech nightmares about, companies engaging certain tech agencies and stuff like that, and just having an absolute communication meltdown because they get furious. They had, I told you we wanted this functionality and this functionality, and this doesn't work. This isn't what I was expecting, and stuff like that. And so one thing probably worth talking about is, how do we actually manage, communicating that vision from a startup founder, from a business that wants an internal tool or something like that. How do we communicate that vision to the development team and make sure that what's getting built is actually what the client wants?
Cool. And I'm going to loop on to the Upwork stuff, but I think the final thing, and when we were driving to the airport and I called Greg in the car and he's talking about, hey, we're looking to get started, but we're a bit hesitant because we've been burnt so many times before. And I think, you turn on a current affair and you watch Tracy Grimshaw rip apart all these construction companies that leave, it's the Wild West out there. And I just don't think she's met some of the tech.
There's dodgy businesses everywhere.
There's dodgy businesses everywhere, but I look at tech and I see a wasteland of people with unfinished solutions, blown out budgets.
And the thing about tech, and similar to construction, but the thing is, when someone does a botchy job in construction, you can see the crack in the concrete.
Exactly
you can see the water on the floor. You can see all that. But the problem with tech is you have all the exactly.
To someone like Tom, you look at it and you go, "This looks correct.
Yeah.
What's wrong?"
And the button, sometimes the button works. The button works, but then a guy like me or a guy like Pat who understands how this tech works, we take a peek at what's going on under the cover, and we're like, "Whoa." Nothing's named properly in here, like this. There's 15 steps for something that could be done in 2. And I've definitely, and this is why, to be honest, I'm not a huge fan of jumping on existing projects, because I've definitely jumped into some projects, and sometimes even on the initial look, you're like, all right, this looks, okay. But then 1 or 2 weeks later down the line, when you're trying to kind of debug or solve a particular problem, you take a quick peek into the workflow, and then you're like, hold on a second, this is a mess. And so And I think I'll quickly touch on this. I think the solution to that is a process. You know, if you're an agency owner, and this will happen through your freelancing career, because I definitely made a bunch of mistakes, and the whole thing, really the main thing that came out of my freelancing career was making these mistakes, or, you know, building these things and then coming back to them, you know, sometimes even, you know, a week, a month later, and being like, hold on a minute, there's a much quicker, much more efficient way of doing that. And so I think that the key to being a reputable business, and especially in the tech space, is having a process. And what does a process mean? And so that has, you know, everything. And just to touch on what we do at APG Software Solutions when it comes to processes is, we have a clear, defined process in building these apps. So we have discovery, we build a scope of work document, we have design files, we build you your Figma prototypes, we build you your database architecture diagram. You know, we have a complete kind of framework that we build on with Bubble. So that includes things like naming conventions, documentation, proper labeling, error management, stuff like that. And all of that is we have Gitbook documentation for every app that we push now. So, you know, everything's in that Gitbook. So if another developer jumps on board, and even some of our non-technical kind of startup founders, they can read the Gitbook, they can plug it into ChatGPT, and they can get an understanding.
You almost want to make it where the client can also read what's going on. They're obviously not going to be able to read it, most of them, but to some extent, they know what's going on, because the worst thing as a client user as well is sitting on your website or whatever it is, or some sort of tech, and sitting there going, shit, like, I have no idea what's going on.
And that's the most
it looks
frustrating
great,
thing.
but it's like, I want to change this, but I have no idea, what even.
And that's why communication is so important, because one of the most, and I sympathize with this completely, being from a non-tech background originally, is one of the most frustrating things for a lot of these startup founders, a lot of these businesses, when they engage with these tech companies, is they feel because they've invested, you know, often a lot of money, and they're sitting there, and then they get, you know, certain developers come back being like, this feature's taken a little bit longer than expected, and they don't understand what's actually happening. And so from a page point of view, they're like, but all I need to do is click this button. Just make the button work. Just make the button work. And then you kind of, it's a real skill to, in a high level way, be able to explain why, you know, setting that button up to work isn't just an hour job, and you kind of got to, you know,
give me the computer, I'll make the button work.
Exactly.
Give me 2 seconds.
It's just an important skill in running an agency, is being able to communicate with these non-technical founders and be able to, you know, explain why. And really, that should happen in the scoping stage for a lot of your functionality, and that's something we've gotten wrong sometimes, is not scoping things out in the detail necessary, and then discovering midway through the project that, because we don't want to let the client down on that bad news either. You know, we don't want to be like, hey, look, I know we quoted you 10 hours to build this, you know, PDF feature, whatever it is. You know, now that we've talked it out a bit more, it's actually going to be 50 hours. No one wants to have that conversation, and it's not good for you as an agency. So it's about having a clear process, having a clear scoping process. And I think we've really refined ours. And the only way you get a good scoping process is getting burnt and learning from it.
So pretty much.
The only reason we
that is a life lesson.
Exactly.
Learn from it.
That's the whole thing about it. I think building an agency and getting a process, you know, a really good process, really comes from doing this as a freelancer, or building that many apps, making that many mistakes, and being like, man, if only I could have some sort of process so that next time that doesn't happen again. That's where our whole kind of framework building on Bubble came from. Our naming conventions, we've got authentication and admin dashboards and all sorts of these common things in these apps pre-built, and we've done them a bunch of times now. We're like, all right, let's save this. It's nice and secure. This works. Let's save all these processes and not have to redo them in every single app. And we know these processes work. So, you know, keep working on that.
So you said you've been doing it for 3 years, right?
Just over, yeah.
Just over 3 years.
Yeah.
It's a long time. Like, it's not a long time to scheme, but I feel like I know you well, and obviously G knows you well. Yeah. But I've seen how much hours and stuff you put in. So I feel like for someone listening or watching, the 3 years could really, you know, the experience of 3 years is much longer than 3 years. But my actual question was, because obviously this will reach a lot of people who, you know, might want to start a tech agency or whatever it is. Do you have, I'm going to go full Andy Elliott mode. Do you have a good piece of advice or the best piece of advice for someone starting a tech agency? If you had one piece of advice to give them, what would that be?
I think there's a lot you can talk about here. And first off, just quickly touching on the experience thing, I really don't believe in talking about years when it comes to experience. I'm really big on that. And the reason for that is because, especially with the internet these days, there's some 16-year-olds running, businesses, and they spend every week an hour doing all sorts of crazy things. So I'm really big on talking about what have you done. I'm really not interested in how many years you've been doing anything.
And that's why I touched on before. 3 years, for people, you say 3 years, but if people saw,
I also think when you're a freelancer, right? When you're an employee, and you do years,
9 to 5 for 20 years.
It's years of pizza parties on a Friday afternoon, and company trips to this and that. And I think when you look at freelancing's about projects. And the biggest difference is when you're an employee, because you're getting paid at the end of the week, you in a lot of instances not too much tied to the outcome. Whereas when you freelance, in a lot of instances, 100%. You don't deliver a good product, you don't get paid, right? You get the brunt of it. And so, and I also think, when you're an employee, in a 10-year career, you might work across 10 projects, maybe 20.
It really depends, but
it really depends. When you're an employee, in order for a company to be efficient, they want to make you really good at one specific thing. Whereas when you're a freelancer, because you're wearing all the hats, right? Not just the
experience
depth,
is ridiculous,
but the I guess the breadth,
the well-rounded
of experience you get, because every client's running a different tech stack with a different requirement. You're dealing with different personalities, different priorities in the business, right? And so when you look at projects, I'm nearing 300. You're on.
It'd be 70, 80 up.
Exactly, right? And so 80 projects is like 3 years doesn't sound like a lot. You'd probably struggle getting an entry-level job in a tech company on 3 years experience. But, you're not comparing apples to apples there. But talk about the experience. You've delivered 80 apps, right?
I'll quickly, in terms of just advice to someone that's starting, I think we both work in a similar tech space. So the fact that Pat did it, Pat did it first, and then I did it and to a lot of people it sounds like the same thing, but it is different. So I work in custom software development. He works in process automation. That probably sounds like a bunch of gibberish to some people, but
it overlaps, but it's different.
It overlaps, but it's different.
What's the difference? Explain it to Tom.
Basically, custom software development is, we build a lot of internal apps. It's what typically happens, web apps specifically, but we also build native apps, which are things, on your phone app stores. But we build those apps that you log into every day, things like Uber, your marketplace applications, sometimes your internal tools, like when you log in for your business's CRMs, we build those kind of things as well. So that's custom software. And then process automation, which we also offer at APG Software Solutions, is more about an existing business. And specifically, I think SMEs are really the target here, because your massive enterprise companies are working on custom softwares, but all of your businesses in between are working off these big CRM tools. I call them plug and play tools, but these big tools like Monday.com, Pipedrive, your big CRMs, you've got all your email services, you got your social, some of these companies have got all these kind of social media marketing campaigns and all that kind of stuff. And it's about how do we make this talk together so that, the business can achieve things much quicker and,
just scale, right?
Exactly. And you would know, running a football coaching company, you've probably got a social media marketer that spends 30, 40 hours a week, maybe sifting through content. What if we could have some sort of automation that, maybe uses AI and some sort of...
I'll give you a better example, right? The difference is, Adam's building custom tech. Let's take that social media marketing example, right? You go create content. You're obviously posting content on Instagram. What you would do is automate it. So instead of that social media person putting it on Instagram and then going to TikTok and putting it on TikTok and then going to LinkedIn and putting it on LinkedIn, we build you an automation that says, I put it in one place and we'll put it everywhere else for free. And suddenly your social media manager gets 10 hours back that week that they would have otherwise been doing that. Okay, now I've made something more efficient. Where can I better spend that time? That's the difference.
And that's, again, time is money.
Exactly.
For everyone listening, time is money.
And the real selling point as well. And I think the real reason, I'm not a sales guy. I never came from a sales background, and I actually went to some sales job interviews and didn't get them. So, must be pretty crappy in sales. But I think the reason why I've never really had a problem selling these services, and I don't think Pat really has either, is because it's a win-win. It's actually just both parties are winning. You know, we're making some money building this product for you. You're saving money because, you know, you've now got all these repetitive processes in your business automated.
Well, everyone, like I said, everyone's happy at the end of the day, right?
Exactly.
Like if and that's like Pat. Just for reference, Pat sat me down in Mallorca on a couch and sold it to me.
Well, exactly. I think a lot of these
sitting in a pair of board shorts, like
a lot of these businesses, they don't know what they don't know, and they don't know that some of these processes can be easily automated. They don't know that, you know, a custom software could be saving them, you know, thousands of hours a week, because they don't know what they don't know. And so I think one thing that's probably really important for me and Pat is to find examples of these systems and actually demonstrate, you know, show a similar, especially if you can find a similar business in the industry. And because I've pretty much worked or built an app for every major industry that's out there now. Yeah. So when I jump on a sales call, you know, I've spent 5 or 10 minutes listening to the problem, and it's crazy how often this happens. The amount of times I'm like, you know, it's funny you say that, because we've actually built an application that has almost the exact same use case.
Tommy's in that boat.
Exactly. And
I'm sitting in the boat right now.
What you find as an agency owner, and Pat, you've probably gotten to this level as well, is 80% of these apps are actually really similar at the core. The functionality of 80% of these apps is very similar. You've got, you know, your login, sign up, your checkout process, you've got some sort of payment provider, some sort of admin dashboard, you know, and then you offer some sort of value. So there's the basis of all these apps, and then you've got the cherry on top, which is your unique business's value. And so what you'll find is when I get on these calls, I spend 5 to 10 minutes listening to the problem, and automatically in my head already I'm making connections on, yep, I hear what you're saying here. I understand this problem because we did the exact same thing for business XYZ. Let me actually, you know, give you a quick peek under the hood on how this works. And then and that's why I'm saying, like, I don't come from a sales background, but the amount of times that I've done this now, the amount of time, it's like, I don't even think or feel like I'm selling anything, because when I get on these calls, I honestly just approach it as like, I hear their problem and I'm like, cool, I've actually done an app that saves this exact same thing. Take them through the demo. They're usually pretty keen, and then I'm like, all right, when can we schedule another time to chat? And that's the sales.
It's a big thing, because I feel like, you know, if you're passionate about something and you know something inside out, you don't need to, like, everyone talks about, you know, the car salesman at a local dealership, you know, he's getting his nice commission, blah, whatever, right? But if you're like, even in my field of work, like, you sell group sessions to kids, right? But I'm selling it because I know the kids are going to get better. Exactly. I'm not selling it, you know what I mean? Where you go to the used car dealership.
If you feel like they're going to be hard done by, right? That I feel like if you're passionate about the product and you know that what you deliver is proper and they're going to get a good outcome, then you don't feel like you're selling. I think what you're touching on is like, if I'm selling a car that I know is a lemon, right? Then I'm selling, but I feel a little bit guilty.
Exactly.
Yeah, agree.
You're essentially lying, and I think you are. Like, and I think I think the main thing, if, you know, especially as a freelancer and then as an agency owner, when it comes to sales, is your passion's contagious. Like, people, when you're actually passionate, and I think that's to touch on as well, the difference between, you know, why I don't like talking in years of experience is because I've found, especially not only it also in kind of hiring contractors and staff, is passion is invaluable. And when for me, when I find a software developer that actually, or even a designer, I engaged a designer just recently that, you know, without me even asking, kind of went over the top, and I could just tell he was passionate. And the quality of output that you get from someone that's actually passionate about what they're doing, and they're not just clocking into work and staring at the clock the entire day and leaving. When you work with those people that are actually passionate about what you're doing, the output that you get is on a whole different level, and the entire experience is on a whole different level as well. Because even when you just talk, like, they know a whole lot more. You know, they know all the ins and outs of how this thing works, and you just get a completely different experience. And so that's like for people hiring, but also like just working and stuff like that. And that'll be my recommendation to anyone who's looking for a tech developer or anyone who's looking to engage in an agency, is jump on the call. And you can gauge pretty quickly
what's going on.
You know, how much this person knows and how, you know, excited they are. If you jump off that meeting and you feel like you know, you were flogging a donkey for 30 minutes, then it's probably not.
It probably is a donkey.
You know what I mean? It probably is. It's probably
if I
not
got to
someone you want to
squeeze,
work with.
and I think the biggest thing is like passion is like, if I got to squeeze the information out of you, you're not passionate.
Yeah, you're not there.
Right? Like,
yeah.
The thing is, like, is I got to be, you know, like me, I'll talk to the cows come home. You ask me a question, I'll keep going until you tell me to stop.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So, you know, I think the biggest thing is that when I'm doing an interview, I sit and I go, okay, how long have you been building on Bubble, right? And really, like, if they don't answer the question and then come straight back to me with a couple of questions for me, I'm sitting there going, you don't have enough skin in the game. You're not, this is a job for you. And I think the biggest thing is when you're hiring employees, you know, it is a job for them, right? But when you're hiring freelancers, bingo. But when you're hiring freelancers, I mean, this is their business, right? So I think it's a different ballgame. You hire employees, you know.
I will say that like some people are. They want to rip, like, especially some of the guys.
It's rare though.
My team is amazing. Like, I cannot fault them at all. But some of them, like, you know what I mean. They want to know exactly why certain things are happening. Yeah. They're constantly like their willingness to because they're at the end of the day, like, from, you know, their skills are there to get better. Like, it's the same as, you know, school and everything else. You can sit there for 6 hours and muck around, and which, to be honest, we all did. But if you could, you know, or you can sit, you know, I have to sit here anyway, I may as well make the most of it. And
I think we had this yarn the other day. Like, dude, we had this yarn yesterday. Because I think you were saying about the similar, like, there's no, I think when you're younger, you think like, you know, you have to sit through it and whatever, you know, put your one earpod in the side and, you know, the teacher's going blah, 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 and just, whatever, mate. But I think as you go older and you mature, and I think the biggest thing is, like, as business owners now, I think reflection, you're like, if you're going to do something, or if you have to sit through something, take something from it. Like, do you know what I mean? At the end of the day, like, your time, and again, time is money. Like, if you're sitting there and you're sitting in a sales thing, mate, get a notepad out, take something from it. Yep. You know, like, you might not be the star of the show or talking or whatever, but if you're sitting in a crowd of 1,000 people, take something, like, get your notepad out, write something down, walk out of there with something that you can take home, some valuable experience, you know what I mean, and apply it to the real world.
Yeah, and so to circle back, because I think freelancing and how to start freelancing and stuff like that is probably a good direction to go. But to circle back to something that's relevant there, a lot of people who start these agencies, but also these freelancers, are doing it in a space that they've worked in before, because obviously if you've worked in it, you have an understanding of how that industry works and how you can do it. So especially for someone who wants to, you know, start freelancing, my advice there would be take a look at any skills that you might already have or at least be somewhat interested in. I know a lot of people that are interested in things like, you know, social media, for example. There's a lot of opportunities there on Upwork. There's a lot of opportunities for designers, anyone creative. There's also a lot of opportunities for software people, you know what I mean? You don't need to have experience in the game. I didn't have any software experience, you know, prior to what I'm doing now. But you do need to at least have an interest. And I did have an interest in building businesses and stuff like that. And so that's really where mine started. Is the first start was trying to build my own business on Bubble for a month or so. That's where I learned the basic skills that allowed me to then turn to somewhere like Upwork, scroll through the job feed and be like, you know, this person needs their shopping cart fixed for $20. You know, let me jump in and do that. And then that's where the skills start to compound. So you get the basic skills doing some sort of personal passion project, or this is at least the roadmap I took. Basic skills, you know, that could be through work. It could be on the side of work. Basic skills there. Then turning to these job markets like Upwork, I know Contra is another one, and taking a look through there and looking at the jobs and being like, are any of these things that I can do? And then as you go through more and more of those, not only does your rate go up and you start getting paid a bit more, but your experience goes up, and that, you know, you'll make a lot of mistakes in that phase. I definitely did. You'll do a lot of things in, you know, probably not the best way that you could do them. That's just part of the learning process. Every person's going to make those mistakes, especially as a developer. But, you know, the more and more that you do of those, the more confident you get on these calls, being able to answer questions about tech products, you know, the more confident you get in your own skills. And then your price just, you know, your value as a developer just goes up and up and up there. And the cool thing about that as well is you'll work on all these different projects. So instead of, you know, being hired at one company and working on the same project for 2 or 3 years, which, don't get me wrong, is, you know, still going to be good, but you get experience working over 50 different projects that all have these kind of different, you know, different things going on in each one. And so you get a really nice diversified experience background.
Before we talk about Upwork, if you don't do Upwork, how else do you get started would be my question.
Like, what does Upwork give you? Before you even get to Upwork?
Well, I wouldn't even say that. I'd just say, like, okay, let's say Upwork didn't exist and I wanted to start freelancing. Because Upwork charges you a bit of money to bid on jobs, right? And a lot of feedback I get, I'm in a lot of groups with, like, Upwork freelance and that kind of stuff. They're like, oh, it's getting too expensive. It costs me, like, fucking $4 to bid on a job or something, right? And so what I'd probably do is before we go over how do I get my first job, how do I identify what I can do on Upwork, let's say, well, if Upwork didn't exist, how would you get a job?
Yeah. Well, I think the very first thing when it comes to like wanting to go down that path, I think it first stems out of like wanting to do something else outside of your actual job. I think that's where it is like, and I talk, and a lot of people that I like, a lot of friends and stuff have that. They, even if that's like selling biscuits out the front of your house or something, like a lot of people have a side passion or a side, they want to make a little bit of, they make a little bit of money on the side through all different types of things. Like, doesn't have to be tech related. So I think that's probably where football coaching started.
Yeah.
So there's a million things you can do on the side. I think the very first thing is even just a feeling of like wanting to do something after work. If you come home and you just want to watch Netflix and you don't, then you probably, freelancing is probably not for you. So I think the very first step is just having that want to be doing something that's out. If you're super happy and content in your job and you love what you do and stuff like that, cool. Like you don't need to do freelancing at all. So that's probably the very first starting point before you get to anything else.
But and I agree with you, but what I was maybe touching on is a lot of feedback's like, well, Upwork might be expensive. You obviously, it is a bit of pay to play, right? You got to bid on jobs, especially when you're starting. People aren't going to reach out to you in a lot of instances. You got to go win your first couple jobs, right? And I guess what I always think is, okay, let's say Upwork didn't exist, right? You got to run ads. Like Tom runs ads, right? So it's like, well, let's take a look at Tom. Tom doesn't have Upwork, right? How does Tom get a client, right?
Yeah.
You got to run ads, I'm assuming.
Yeah, I do.
Exactly.
Well, word of mouth.
There's word of mouth, but like, let's say, like
at the very start, you're not going to have word of mouth.
You've kind of grown to where you are now based off word of mouth, because I know you run ads, and I get your ads.
Yeah.
Right. So like, you definitely run ads.
Must be working.
But are they doing well, or is a lot of it word of mouth?
A lot of it is word of mouth. Cool. Ads support the word of mouth. I think it also depends, like different business, because you guys are more leads based, right? Yeah. Mine's more like if Johnny knows Jimmy.
I agree, but I guess what I'm tackling is like when Adam got started, he can't work off word of mouth because he doesn't know anyone in the tech industry, right? So you got to use Upwork, because otherwise you spend, you've got to run your own ads, which means you've got to invest time and a lot of money in building your landing pages and getting your content and your this and that. So Upwork gives you the foot in the door to say, hey, you know what? We'll give you the structure. We'll tell you how to build your profile, right? We'll give you a bit of tips. Go build a profile. We'll get you approved, and we'll give you access to the jobs. And that is like, if that didn't exist, you'd have to run ads. It'd be a night. Like it would have been really removed the barrier to entry, right? Which is really big. But I guess the opportunity cost of that, and what we're going to discuss, is like Upwork's done a great job of removing the barrier of entry in order to be able to freelance and offer your own services and identify what services need to be offered, because everyone's got access to the job board. You can see what people want. You can see how many people are bidding on that. But the opportunity cost of that is that now you go on Upwork and there's so many people on it that the low barrier to entry is kind of now done the full circle of, well, actually now there's almost more of a barrier to entry because there's so many people on this kind of global gig marketplace, which is really common these days. And so then that stems the question of, well, how do you get your first job? And before you even do that, how would you recommend identifying what to specialize in? You obviously came from a construction background. You didn't know tech. So how did you kind of sit there and go, well, maybe it's bubble?
Yeah. So I think, you're right. So step one, after realizing that you want to do something on the side, step two is figuring out what that is. And so if it's something digital, Upwork's a great place for you. And that's probably what we're going to focus on. And so from there, I guess it's worth mentioning that I don't think I ever would have ended up in a tech career if it wasn't for Upwork. I didn't necessarily find coding interesting prior to doing that. What I loved was having control over my own revenue and being able to build things myself. So in terms of like, if I'd gone and studied computer science or whatever at university and then gone to work at Google, I probably would have hated it. It's not actually the skill that I love doing. It's actually just taking control of being able to deliver my own projects, being able to work hard and reap the rewards of my own hard work is the main. And so that's why I think I probably could have done anything. So yeah, I'm a software developer. If I'd gone into design and found an easy route into there, or, you know, found an easy route into social media marketing or something like that, there's a good chance I would have loved that as well. So when it comes to finding what you're like passionate about and what you want to freelance in, have a look around, go on Upwork, and you can actually view all of the jobs on there. Take a look at just some of the work that exists there. So you're going to see a lot of, you know, design jobs, a lot of development jobs. They're predominantly tech. There's some other stuff on there as well, but there is a lot of tech jobs, and it's more just about like scrolling down and, you know, seeing what could be interesting. And for me, I think it was, it's not just about the actual skill, because I think there's a lot of people out there that look at like the life of a coder and they're like, that could never be me. Like, I would hate to be on my computer all this time doing all that. And I think that would have been me prior to finding Upwork. But I think there's more than just the actual skill that you'll love. Yeah. You'll love the whole freelancing aspect of being able to, you know, talk to clients, control when you work, control when you jump on meetings, and all of that kind of stuff. So I'd say keep that in mind when you're looking for your skill. But yeah, that's.
I would also say to get a bit more granular is what I would do if somebody came to me and said, "Hey, how do I get started?" The first thing you need to look at with these kind of things is supply and demand, right? So, what skills do people want, and how much supply is there for that, right? And the way you do that on Upwork is you've got the ability to filter through jobs, right?
And location.
Right?
Which is a big one.
So first thing you want to do is you want to say, okay, I only want to look at things that have got less than 10 proposals, right? And ideally, I want to look at something that's got less than 10 proposals and is at least a couple hours a day, 2 days old, right? Which means there's been people who've had a look at it and people haven't bid on it, right? And then I want to see, are there any consistencies in what I'm seeing here? Right, because a lot of those are just trash jobs. Yeah, right, and that's why people don't.
A lot of the bids as well. Like, I think people see the bid numbers, like, you know, 15, 20, 50 bids on there. That's fine. But let's say there's a job posted in Sydney, Australia for like those 50 bids from everywhere. Exactly. Yeah. Just because there's 50 bids on a job, if it's in your hometown and you write that proposal correctly, and we'll probably get on writing a winning proposal in a second. But one thing that you also want to look at in these jobs is, and to stand out on Upwork, because as you said, we both started on this platform a couple of years ago. It was not as saturated as it is now. Is how can you stand out? And one of the big ones is location. And we'll talk about developing your profile as well, having a video on your profile, because if someone wants to build a bubble app in Sydney, there's a very good chance that you know, that they'll come to me, and I do have a lot of people inviting me for that, because everyone would rather work with someone that's from their hometown. They can meet them in person. The communication's there. You know what I mean? So it's like, work on your advantages. So first, pick your niche. Whether that's designing, whatever it is, you can filter location on Upwork. Then try and find people that are, you know, you have strengths in. If they're based in Australia, Australians, you know, they'd rather work with someone in the time zone and all of that kind of stuff. Pick your niches, go in there, and then it's about writing a winning proposal and also setting your profile up properly. And so I think those are two completely different things. So the first thing when you create your Upwork account, you're going to have $0 earned and an empty profile, right? Which no one wants to look at. You're not going to win any jobs with that. So step one is to fill your profile out. So that include, like, if you have access to, and my first video I filmed in my bedroom, you know, I put a little green screen up that half worked. And kind of, you know, 2-minute video. Hi, my name's Adam. You know, I'm a Bubble developer. I've built these apps. You know, if you're looking to build an application, you probably haven't heard of Bubble. This is why Bubble's really good for your business. You know, lay your sales pitch on them. And for us, that's about how we can build you an MVP in 4 to 8 weeks for 10K, which is peanuts in comparison to, you know, traditional software development. Lay out your sales pitch. And not only are you, like, you know, explaining and giving value in the video, the real purpose of your video, and this is what I kind of talked about, I actually made a YouTube video on how to set up an Upwork profile. The sole thing that you're trying to achieve with the Upwork profile is trust. You're trying to get the client to trust you. Everything that you do on your Upwork profile should hone into, am I, you know, increasing? You should, like, the way I would think of it is think of your Upwork profile as a trust number from 0 to 100. You know what I mean? Everything that you do on your Upwork profile should be about, how can this client trust me more by looking at this profile? And a video is a really big part of that, because everyone else just has a page, right? They don't know how you communicate. They don't know, they can't see you and understand who you are. When they look at a video, they automatically they know about your communication skills. They know what you can do. It's a good 2 minute. They're probably more engaged for that video than they are just scrolling through your profile. So I would say if you want to stand out on Upwork at the start, even with $0 earned, anyone can add a video on there. So that would be that'd be my main selling point for standing out.
Video, clear photo. The other thing I would probably add to that is especially in my line of work where I'm working with a lot of tools, you got to understand what are the keywords that people are going to be searching that I want to show up for, right? Me, I'm a Monday.com expert. That's obviously going to be littered everywhere through my particular. And the other thing I'd normally write on is kind of a case study 1 to 2. It's all about what I can do for you. The clients don't care about me. They don't care about what I do. It's about, hey, I've delivered case study 1, case study 2, Australia's biggest TV show, whatever it is. Here's what I did for them. And that's all they care about.
And and then that comes down to that description, your profile description. I think there as well. So it's about listing as much as you can do in there. Like that really should be as full as possible, and metadata for your title and stuff like that. You'd be surprised what like one keyword change does to your profile. You can actually check it as well. Like I had a session where I sat down like 5 months ago and played around with those keywords in that title, and then went to the search page and saw how that worked, and it's crazy how much it changes, and you can actually see the change. I think you did this listing a project, so I didn't realize how much those keywords actually played in the ranking. If you go in there, and so I obviously build apps on Bubble, which is what I do, looked at all the projects what happens when you search Bubble, and I realized that everyone that has their project ranking highly has mentioned Bubble in the title, sometimes 5 or 6 times. It's literally like Bubble.io, MVP, build you like it doesn't the title actually almost doesn't even make sense, but it's all about trying to get it to because they're not people aren't scrolling to page 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6. And my project started getting a lot more views after doing that.
You know what little hack I actually do as well that I find really works?
What
is just leaving Upwork open on a browser, because a lot of people when they go to Upwork they want to make a quick hire. Like when I go and I want to hire someone, I almost want to hire someone in like
they want to talk 10 minutes. To you quickly.
You know what I mean? Like I want to like, yo, go have a coffee, come back and be like, mate, can we hop on now? Right? And so when I scroll through that list, I actually look for a green dot. I'm like, who's online right now? Right? And I actually move them to the front of the list. So a little hack I usually do as well to just keep things up is like, if I'm by a computer, I just leave Upwork open, right? And then that way I genuinely notice a difference with the amount of invites I get. Like recently, invites have gone down because I'm not really active on Upwork. I'm busy out and about, right? And you definitely notice a difference and a fluctuation based on that, because I actually think Upwork probably does track activity in their actual portal. And that probably does contribute to your ranking.
I would agree with that. And so that really comes down to the description, stuff like that. I think the last thing as well is adding your case studies and your experience in there. Now, if you've just started, obviously that's going to be a bit challenging. And my recommendation would be, especially if you're doing anything tech related, design jobs, software jobs, you have to have done a couple passion projects before you jumped on Upwork, surely. And if not, like if you're someone who's out here trying to learn code, trying to figure stuff like that, do a couple passion projects just for yourself, just purely and use those. They don't need to know that it's a passion project. At the end of the day, again, it all comes down to trust. The only thing they want to know is, can you solve my problem? Are you the guy? Are you the person to solve my problem? And it all just comes down to adding that trust. That's and I've hired a bunch on Upwork a bunch of times. That's the only thing they care about. And the whole thing is, if they jump on the meeting, your camera's not on. They don't know who you are. They're just not 100% sure that you can solve the problem, and you're probably never going to hear from them again. So I think the last thing there really is about trying to make some nice mock-ups or whatever it is of any previous projects you've had and add those in there. And then the last thing I'll touch on, I think that's pretty much like kind of
because I want to cover the proposal side.
So
right?
and I'll touch on it briefly. I think so this is what happened in terms of a timeline from proposals that I've seen. I think 5 years ago we saw all these messy ass proposals from people that were half-assing it. Then what happened is OpenAI came out, and now we get nice AI generated proposals from everyone, right? And so I think what happened was that a new wave of AI came out, and everyone was like, oh yeah, just quickly prompt OpenAI to generate me a nice.
I can copy the description, copy my profile bio, chuck them into ChatGPT, and then copy 7 paragraphs.
Exactly,
on blah, blah, blah.
And I'm like, wait, and I think what happens now,
it's gone full circle.
It's full circle now, and it's like the last thing I want to see is a nicely formatted OpenAI proposal from you, because now I know you haven't really looked at it. And so I think instead of using OpenAI, jump in there and try and sound as human as possible, as quickly as possible. You know what I mean? Because if I can tell you, like whenever I'm looking at people that have applied to my jobs, I'm scrolling down and all of the AI generated ones, I'm like, okay, you clearly, like, even if you have looked at it, I'm like, I don't think this person's really reviewed this job properly.
And it's actually really obvious. And what I do to distinct myself there is drop 1 or 2 like case studies, like, hey, you're looking to integrate this and that. I worked with these guys and did that. And that's something that AI won't do for you because it doesn't have the it's a really easy way to distinct yourself. I jumped on a meeting with this guy from Switzerland who had over 2 million spent on Upwork. And the first thing he said when I jumped on the meeting was, you didn't use AI to write your proposal.
Yep.
And I was like, no, mate, I never do that. Right. Yep. And the thing is like, it's so blatantly obvious who is, and what it actually demonstrates is it demonstrates a lack of confidence if you do that, and a lack of knowledge.
A lack of care as well, bro. Like, I feel like if you actually cared about the job and you're passionate about the job,
game. Like, that person's probably submitted 50 proposals
today. Just all it's the same AI, right? Like, if you actually care about it, if you review a job and you want to actually help someone, I feel like you know what I mean, you're writing the proper one, going, yo, like, whatever
agree.
UI design needs work, whatever it is.
I agree, but because what I think is, I think a lot of people go and they say, hey, I'm going to improve my proposal by going to ChatGPT and spruiking it up, right? And
to make it stand out,
and it'll maybe add some context and lingo and that kind of stuff that will make them, feel like I'm a more confident option. I actually think maybe initially, to be honest, but now that everyone's caught onto it, it has the absolute reverse effect.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, and so the last thing there as well is you have, like, you'll see, and if you've ever hired someone on Upwork before, but just in case, if there's freelancers out there that haven't done that, basically what happens is when someone applies to your job, you see their the little widget of their profile, and you see the first two lines. So that first 2 lines, it has to,
if it is generic and it's like, hey there, like, you can tell from a mile away if it's generic, which is why I'm sometimes even a little too. I'm the same. It's like, sound like a human as much as possible, because what they want to see is A, that you actually took time to write this proposal, and B, you know what you're talking about. So usually the way I kind of enter those ones is I actually keep it like kind of blunt. I go, hi, comma, often I'll be like, is anywhere you can kind of sound human, like, go for it, especially if they're in Australia or something like that. I usually start off with, hi, funny you're in Australia, I'm actually based in Sydney, and then my next thing from there is we did this exact same thing for someone else. Keep it basic, you know what I mean? It doesn't need to be super complicated, and I don't usually go super in depth in the proposal anyway. I usually go, this is what we did. Sometimes, if you have some experience, drop that as well. And then I go, when can we jump on a meeting so I can and I usually, like, because you want to entice them onto the meeting kind of thing. I usually go, I've done something very similar to like this before. When can we jump on a meeting so I can share my screen to show you? 100%. I also think it's the language you put in there. It's like, I hit him with the g'day, mate, because there's no way ChatGPT is putting that at the top of your proposal. Even if they're not Aussie, actually, I do it anyway. But I'm also pretty big on like if they're a local client and they've put it up, because it's all about speed. Like whenever I go to bid on a job, the first thing I do is go to most recent. Yep. I go to most recent, and I think
anything posted over more than 2 days ago is pretty dead.
Correct.
There's a chance, but I personally don't waste my time bidding on anything.
No way. I'm normally 10 minutes. Yeah, right? Like 10, 15 minutes, I'm straight in there. And normally, like, if they're Aussie and it's 10 a.m. in the morning, I'll kind of hit them with a g'day, mate, I've done this before, blah, blah, blah. Are you free right now? Or can we, I got an availability at 1. Let's lock something in. Yep. And the amount of time people come back pretty on the spot and go, yeah, mate, 1. Like, I'll catch you then, is pretty crazy, because it's also about the language. If it's generic and it's like, hey, I'd love to, I just keep it real casual. A couple of sentences. Hey, I've just done this for Australia's biggest TV show. Yeah. They use Slack. This is what I've done for them. I'm around now, or you can try me again at 1. Sometimes I'm even a little cheeky and I go, and this is my number, give me a buzz.
Yeah. And so I think when you're starting and you can't go, hi, I've worked on, Australia's biggest TV show, whatever. It's like, I would just word it as, you've got some case studies. I use app development because that's what I do, but I would be like, I just built this in, one of the apps that I've been working on. You don't need to mention who it's for if it's not for Google, you know what I mean? But, I've built this in in one of the latest apps I built. Be happy to jump on a screen and share it with you. And there's a lot of little, I think as well in your niche, you'll get like, especially for app development, I think there's probably a lot of people doing this already. For Bubble, you can install some templates and demo something that you may not have actually built. Especially in those early days, someone wants to see Kanban working or Kanban board working or something like that. You can search that template. And this is probably a little bit of a hack, but you could search for that template on, install it on your computer and demo it to a client being like, this is possible. Yeah. You don't need to lie, but you can say, you did build it. Like working off templates is something every developer does. You know what I mean? So there's all sorts of little tips and tricks that you can kind of learn to finesse these meetings. And it probably leads us into the next thing, which is sales calls. And because it's one thing to, stage 1 is to get that proposal in and get selected. But the sales call is probably the nervy part because everything's done on a computer up until that point. Once you get on that call, it's a different beast. You know what I mean? You need to be able to.
What I would say is, there's a lot of sayings that go either way, but the biggest thing is like sometimes the best person at delivering the job is not the one that makes the most money, because being able to deliver the job properly is one thing. Being able to sell that to the client is a completely different ballgame. The amount of, we're obviously both in the development space, but the amount of developers that cannot convey expectations, manage clients, sell properly, understand what is in scope, what's a variation, all the kind of intricacies that come with a sales call, scoping projects out. Being able to develop is one thing. Being able to actually understand, because when you're a freelancer, when you're an employee, you don't have to understand the client's requirement. You have a written brief ready to go when you're a developer and you work off that. Right? You have to write the brief when you're a freelancer, and you need to understand the use case. Okay, I'm Tom, I run a coaching company, I have a calendar, I have all these different things. I need you to build me a software. Tom doesn't know the first step and how to scope that project out. That was pretty obvious last week, right? And so really delivering the solution is half the game. The other half of the game is saying, what does Tom actually want? Because he doesn't know what he wants and he doesn't know how to get it done. And that's fair enough. Tom's not in the tech developing business. You're the expert. And so I think part of that sales call is grabbing it by the horns and actually showing that client how it needs to be delivered. And if you do it properly, it shows the expertise that you have and it leaves them so much more confident. Whereas I can't tell you the amount of freelancers I've hired that are requiring me to drive the conversation and kind of describe what I want when the average customer on Upwork doesn't really know.
Well, and that's the thing. They're coming to you as the professional. And so I think as well, when I was earlier on, and the key thing to note here as well is you will make mistakes on those sales calls. The fact, nobody is a sales boss from day zero, especially when you're not an expert in your field. You become a boss on these sales calls after screwing up a bunch of times, learning what not to say on a sales call, but also just learning more about your niche and becoming a professional in your niche. Because once you have freelance enough and you really know what you're talking about, you don't think about these sales calls, you jump on. And I'd say one of the main reasons why it's so easy for me and Pat to sell right now is because we've done them a million times, but the amount of times on a sales call, back when I started, where they asked me a question, I didn't 100% know the answer. I was a bit unsure of myself and stuff like that. It's really obvious. And again,
clients can smell it. You can smell it from a mile away.
Yeah. And I think again, it really just comes down to trust. The client wants to know that you know what you're talking about, and it's easy to waffle that on messages and stuff like that. When you got ChatGPT there to ask every question, but when you can actually nail those questions on a call, your trust rating's just going up, because when they go, we used this solution in the past and it didn't work, and now we want to do something else. And if you actually know what they're talking about and you can literally refer to it, you're ticking points. Because the average sales guy in tech who doesn't know anything about tech, as soon as that conversation gets slightly technical at all, they're sitting there waffling, talking out their ass. And then, sometimes I have to go, look, I'm just the sales guy. I'm going to have to note that question down and come back to you, after the call, which is something you want to avoid. I don't think it's the be all and end all in these sales calls.
Some intricate details you do.
If you're doing it on every tech question, it's not going to look good. If you're doing it every so often, and if you know what you're doing and you've got a bit of experience, you'll be able to answer some of these questions. Some of them you won't. And you may have to come back to them after the meeting. But if you know a little bit, and it's only going to get better. So I think to zero into like people that are starting, because when you first start, you're not the boss on these sales calls. I remember vividly getting on some of these sales calls, not understanding lingo, kind of getting lost in the conversation when they're telling me what they want, because didn't have as much experience as I have now. And so I think the main thing is to definitely record the meeting so you can go back. In those early days, I think, if you don't understand some of what they're talking about, that's fine. As soon as you get off the meeting, search it up and just make sure it's possible. So answer the questions where you can. If you can't, do your best shot. For some questions, it's perfectly fine to be like, hey, mate, look, I haven't actually worked with that tool before. I haven't actually done that exact thing before. But what I'll do is as soon as this meeting's over, I'll do a quick 5-10 minutes of research and I'll let you know if that's possible, straight away. That's the best way to kind of handle it that I've found on those first meetings. Because again, at the end of the day, the only thing the client cares about is, can you do this project or not? Exactly. So the key thing I think you're trying to get from that first sales call is, at the start, I would recommend shutting up and listening to their problem, because I think a lot of people, they get nervous, they jump on the call and it's all about waffle.
Do you remember that guy that reached out to us on LinkedIn? We jumped on a meeting. He asked how
he's telling us about him the whole time.
Minute, and then he just goes all in like, hey, here's what I do, here's what we do, great, blah, blah, blah. I was like, you don't even know who we are, you don't know who our agency is. Like, and it's the whole sell me this pen, and you see all the interviews afterwards where Jordan Belfort's gone, it's got nothing to do with you selling the pen. A real salesperson actually shuts up and listens and understands the problem. The real art of sales is actually listening, more so than talking a lot of businesses.
And so I think the way the ideal sales call runs, right, in my opinion, is you jump on there, you do some quick intros, intro your experience, show that you can communicate properly. Then the way I usually lead into it is like understanding problems. So I'll jump in there and be like, okay, sometimes they've sent a brief beforehand, sometimes not. If they have, I go, look, I had to read through your brief. I think I understand, pretty well what you're trying to build here, but I'd love to hear it in your own words for, 5 or 10 minutes, explain your problem to me, and then I can go through and solve it. And so what will happen is they'll go through 5 to 10 minutes. Maybe I'll, pick a couple questions in there if I have any questions of what they're talking about. Then they feel like, he's listening and he's actually learning about my problems. If I ask some kind of intriguing questions as well, they're like, okay, this guy's he's actually following what we're talking about here. He actually cares about what we're trying to build.
It demonstrates that you're understanding their problem. Exactly. And that's what builds confidence. It's like, I need to be confident that you understand and we're on the same page around what I'm trying to do.
Exactly. And then, after they've done that 5-10 minutes, they feel like you've been listening, which you have been, then you go, okay, like that, that's great. When you mentioned XYZ, in my head, I was just thinking, and then you ask some follow-up questions, clarification questions on what they're trying to build. And then what I usually do from there, after it's pretty clear in both people's heads what's trying to happen here, the way I usually go is, okay, thank you very much for doing that. What I think the logical next step is, and you want to roll into your logical next steps. If you need another meeting, you need another meeting. But if not, the way I usually work is go, I think I've got a pretty clear understanding of what you guys are trying to build here. What I might do is go back, write up a scope of works document, and that's definitely free if you're starting off. You're not charging them for that one. But it usually takes an hour or two of your time if, depending on what project you're kind of doing. I kind of go back to the drawing board. We write up that scope of works document, and then I send that back over to them, and that's the perfect kind of entry into your paid job now. It's like, all right, Adam's taken the time to understand our problem. He's written up a scope of works document, which literally is that. It's our scope of works document. So this is the problem. This is how we're going to solve it. And then from there, that's the perfect jumping step into, this is our proposed solution. This is how we propose doing this. And then it's breaking down into deliverables, breaking down into jobs. So I think in terms of a sales call and how you kind of want it to go, that would be my ideal structure for a sales call. And, I think it's a pretty
I would agree. The only thing I would add to that is try and bolt a bit of a time frame onto it. So normally when I'm finishing off a meeting, I'm going, great, this is what the next step is going to be. I'm going to send this to you. When can I expect you to have a look at it? Right? If I'm going to send you a statement of work, cool. I'm going to get this to you, like Greg, who I called on while I was driving yesterday. I was like, look, mate, I'm going to send this to you this afternoon. You get me the credentials tomorrow. We'll be looking pretty good, 100%. Right? And that way, everyone's on the same page. Not because otherwise, what will happen is you
send out free scopes.
You send out free scopes. He doesn't look at it, or maybe he's going to talk to some other people in between, right? And then, actually, don't worry, I ended up speaking to someone else because you took too long and this and that, right? So me kind of saying, look, I'm going to send this to you tonight. You have a look at it, sign off on it tomorrow, right? What's also pretty important is if you are, when you're starting out, you're not going to be, billing them up front and that kind of thing. But, once you're out of the Sunday league, right, then you kind of say, look, I'm going to send you the invoice tomorrow. You send me the information. We'll get started. He said he was off next week, right? The biggest thing, if you're not a salesperson, you're going to say, oh, don't worry. I'll loop back in with you in 2 weeks' time. 2 weeks, he might have other priorities. His business may change and he's got to hop on the front line, the sales, because he's just lost a big client and there's a huge revenue hole. Situations change very quickly with businesses and with your clients. So time is of the essence. And so instead of saying, oh, don't worry, I was like, look, tell you what, let's rush it through now before you go on holiday. And you're going to win because I'll have the solution done by the time you get back. Right?
And I think the main thing with these sales calls as well is the quicker you can get some sort of financial investment, like you can't take a week to send those documents. Ship sailed.
It comes back to qualifying leads, and we were having this discussion the other day around when I ran the tutoring company. Oh, don't take a deposit, and I was sitting there. Actually, I believe in taking a deposit if you word it right, because the thing is, these people they're all shopping, right? And so if you don't get them to commit to you quickly, you're not the only one who's been on that job. There's going to be other people. It's a marketplace. It's a competition game, right? So if you don't get them to commit to you quickly, then you're inviting other people to potentially steal that opportunity.
Sometimes they could go somewhere else. Sometimes as well, a couple of days, they could be super keen on doing something today, and then in 2 days be like, actually, it can wait. You know what I mean? So the quicker you get some sort of financial investment, the quicker that client's committed to the project, you can actually make a move on that. You don't want to do too much work before that's happened because you may never get the money.
You want to catch it excited.
Exactly, yeah. So, I think that's the main thing in terms of like those early day sales calls. And I think, the more you do them, the better you get.
The only other thing I would say to finish it off would be if the sales call went well, right? And the reason I was on my phone earlier is because I had a call with that Swiss guy, call went great. What I do is when I hop off that call, I'll wait 5 minutes and I'll say, hey, Estefano, really great meeting we just had that was constructive. Here's what I took away out of it. Let me know the next steps, send me a contract over. And that also works really well to just send him a bit of a follow-up if it went well, to be like, great, here's what you told me on the meeting. Here's what the next steps are. Look forward to proceeding, right?
Yeah.
I think that's really, if the call goes well, send him something afterwards, keep that communication up. And then away you go.
And I think as well, so that's the sales call. I think if you can, nobody's a product at the start, but the more you do that, the better you get. And so I think, if you have the profile plus the sales call, you will get rejected a bunch of times, especially at the start. Like, don't expect that to just work if it works on the first client, amazing. But especially some of my friends that have tried to start Upwork careers, they get very disheartened at the start because you send 10, 20 proposals. Nobody looks at you. Then maybe, in your 21st proposal, you do get someone look at you. You hop on the sales call. They ask you a bunch of questions which you have no idea about. Yeah. You butcher it and you feel down in the dumps because this – and so I think it ties into me. Like, it took me a year to make $1,000 on Upwork. So that's a long time to make $1,000 on Upwork. It wasn't, this didn't happen in a week. You could do it a lot quicker than I did it. I think because I was working a full-time job and I had a bunch of other things going on, it wasn't my number one priority at that stage to start. You could do it a whole lot quicker. But, if it doesn't happen tonight, it's about keep trying. I guarantee you, if you keep trying, you keep sending those proposals out, you will get one eventually. You may jump on 3, 4, 5 sales calls and lose it, but eventually you will get it.
One. Yeah.
And so, and the more times you do it, the better you get. And so I think the last thing in terms of like starting out on Upwork that kind of covers sales and profile is the importance of reviews and feedback, especially at those early days.
It's more valuable than the money.
It honestly is. And so I think when you first start, you really have to, and this is what it, kicking the shit or, at the start, that's what that's all about, is that the clients, especially low budget clients, have ridiculously high expectations. So you'll find at the start, you win your first job, you think you've got the project done, you send it back to the client, suddenly you're hearing all about all this extra stuff that nobody talked about. You probably haven't done this too many times. The scope's probably pretty wonky. There isn't really a clear scope in place, and you'll find yourself getting run around the park. And that's perfectly fine at the start because you do learn. You'll end up doing a bunch of extra stuff that you never thought you were going to be doing, probably for free. And you know what I mean? There's a lot of extra steps that happen in that stage. You get ran around the park, but in a year from now, you'll be happy you did it because you learn a bunch of extra skills. You hopefully get a review. Like I remember my first job, I thought it was fixing a shopping cart for $20. I thought I had it done, send it back, all sorts of extra stuff to do, go back. I think it took me probably 10, 15 hours in total to do. But the thing is, main thing I wanted was like every time he came back and goes, no, this needs to change, like this needs to change. Bang, jumped in there, got it fixed because what I was really chasing that 5-star review and some good feedback because even just a couple 5 stars reviews and suddenly you're in business. You know what I mean? It just takes a couple.
I guess the opportunity cost, one bad review can tank. Like I had a job, guy reached out to me, he's like, hey, $300, I'm looking at this down. I was like, look, sorry, I'm not available. I don't really do that kind of work. And he was like, oh, I've got other people that want to do it for cheaper. And so I literally wrote to him and I was like, look, I'm probably not your guy. Go with them. And then he, it was kind of that reverse psychology. He's like, no, I really want you to do it. I was like, look, that's fine. I'll do this for $300. It'll be done tonight. I can't afford to look, I'm a busy guy. I've got a lot of work. And long story short, a week and a half later, it's still going on because he's increased the scope. I actually just gave him all the money back, closed the job, gave him all the money. I was like, look, mate, I've already built this for you. So in reality, because I kind of submitted and he kept coming back being like, oh, no, this isn't working. I want to add things because the scope just blew up. Right. And that's what happens. And before I even took the job, the reason why I was trying to turn it down is because he was kind of questioning me on budget. Can I do it cheaper? Can I do it cheaper? I was like, no, I'm not doing it cheaper. Don't worry about it. And I've, every time I work with somebody that's hunting down the budget,
it's painful.
It's always painful. It always doesn't work. The last kind of 2 jobs where I've done it, and I'll probably never do one again, I've actually just given them all the money back because I don't want the bad review that they're in it. Because their expectations are so high, it's very impossible to kind of play to their standards. They always feel disappointed for the $2 they've given you for 100 hours of work, right? And so
the ironic thing is the low budget clients are usually the hardest to work
for.
The
budget, the easier to
and so when you start, you're working for these low budget clients, they expect the world for a low budget.
Peanuts,
so you will just there is that stage there, which is one of the barriers to entry to freelancing that people put. It's just one of those things that I don't think you can really dodge. As you get more experienced, you can start to read these kind of clients from that call. You can especially if the call's painful, you're not enjoying it, you're not cracking 1 or 2 jokes at the start, whatever it is, you can tell when that communication is just not there. And back in those days, I kind of had to be a yes man. Like I jumped up, I needed the work. But as you on the bright side, as you do more freelancing, as you get busier, you can then afford the opportunity to say no to certain people that come through the door that it's just not going to click. And then.
So if you're going to summarize kind of freelancing in a nutshell, for someone who wants to start it, if you give it like 3 things that are the most important, either lessons or advice or kind of step-by-step things, what would they be?
I think in terms of, I'll approach that from like one, I think like characteristics or personality traits that I think you need. And then the second bit will be, in terms of Upwork, what your profile needs to have. I think from a profile standpoint, to succeed, I think a video goes a long way. A clear video showing your communication skills and what you can do. And I think a properly built profile, a bit of experience filled out, description properly filled out, properly sending these proposals, I think you're automatically above 90% of Upwork if you're doing that. So, if you want to differentiate yourself, it's actually, you'd be surprised how difficult, but also simple because everyone's out there using AI generated
little details.
Everyone's doing the AI stuff and all that kind of stuff. And the easiest part is you can view all the top rated talent on Upwork. Anyone can do that. So go find an Upwork freelancer that you that you respect, that you think's doing really well, copy their profile, copy the way their profile picture looks, copy the way their video, the format, all that kind of stuff, just copy it. And obviously redo it to your skills. So I think in terms of profile setup is that. In terms of actually succeeding, I think it just comes down to basic traits that anyone needs to succeed. I think it's being able to, it really comes down to drive, being able to handle, especially in those early days, being able to handle stress, but also rejection in those early days, being able to send out 20 proposals and not hear anything, jump on 3 sales calls and get rejected. And I think that's because I've actually had a bunch of friends that have tried to start Upwork freelancing this year. And at the start, it's the same thing. They just feel super disheartened because they're like, it's too saturated. I can't get in here. You know what I mean? There's so many people applying for these jobs, blah, 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 blah. It really comes down to get your profile set up correctly. And then it's just about repetition and you'll get better. And then they've actually made it through now. And the hardest part is getting started. That's what I always think. Don't get me wrong. There's a million other challenges that are coming after that. But I think the hardest part is getting started and earning that first few $100 on Upwork, getting that first job. It's down because after that, it's just doing the same thing you did, but you'll keep getting better and better and better and better and better. And there's more challenges that pop up there. But to get started, get your profile set up correctly. And then it's just about repetition and being able to, keep breaking through walls when they pop up.
And I think the final thing to close it out would be, and I remember back when I was in this program with Sky News and Night News, and they were showing us with resume writing and you want to do it this way. You don't want to have any photos on it, and they're pretty much telling you, you want everything to look the same. And I'm sitting there, I'm going, no. This is the opposite of what you need to do. You need to look at what everyone else is doing from that was for resume building, but you got to look at these profiles and you got to say, okay, what can I do differently here so that I stand out? Because what I feel like what everyone tries to do is they try to make it look the same with the cheesy profile photo and this and that. It's like you're looking at it completely wrong. What you're trying to do here is differentiate, not fit in. And that's really
and I think that's why the video, for me, I think is one of the because it's hard to kind of do that with a bunch of text in a description section and a profile photo. But a video is a super easy way for you to appear unique and
just puts a face to a name.
Exactly, they actually get to know Adam or they get to know Pat. They can view the video, and I think it's super important.